Today, let's talk a little bit about knowing your audience, knowing your genre, your setting, and is it possible to go too far by trying to expand? This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name's Bobbie. And, today we're going to be talking a little bit about is it possible as a creator to try to expand but perhaps misjudge your property and where it can feasibly go? Now I know that might sound wildly cryptic, so I'm going to say that this is primarily brought on by the premiere of Season 2 of Andor. Now, full disclosure, I loved Season 1 of Andor. I liked the fact that it did show some of the on-the-ground things of, like, this is what it would be like to live under the Empire kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that what happened in the opening of Season 2 is too far. I'm asking, is it maybe too far? Could it be conceived that way? And also trying to address why some people seem to have a hang-up with it and others don't. So, just to cut to the heart of the issue, I mean, I've already done a video on those episodes. If you want to check it out, I'll link to it up here and down in the description. But essentially what happens is in the third episode, there's an Imperial officer who attempts to sexually assault a woman. Because he knows that she is an illegal, essentially. Doesn't have papers to be on that planet, and not that really matters to the Empire, by the way, but appearances, I guess. So she fights him off, so you don't see anything. But a lot of people have come out and been like, whoa, what's this? This has no place in Star Wars. And I think some of these people, even like me, liked Andor Season 1. They like the grit. But there are certain levels of grit that people just don't enjoy, that they don't watch. And, these are the kinds of people that probably never watched Game of Thrones or watched part of it and decided that was not their cup of tea. And so what I'm wanting to talk about is understanding what can and can't work within your setting. Now, that kind of thing works just fine in Game of Thrones, because we established really early on that Game of Thrones is really gritty, and that we're basically going to see all manner of excesses and depravities. And, well, Star Wars is absolutely not that. There's nothing, you could not show me A New Hope from 1977 and be like, yeah, so one day one of these Imperial goons in here is going to be trying to force himself onto a woman. That's going to happen in this franchise. No, I would not have got that from, any of the original trilogy. The closest you're going to come is to Jabba with Leia. And even there, I mean, it's suggestive of a few things, but, it's still roughly within the realm of kids' fantasy. Now, I'm not saying Star Wars has to stay there forever or anything like that, because, again, I liked Rogue One. I like Andor Season 1. I like most of what I saw in Andor Season 2. And, again, I'm not saying that this is necessarily too far, but I don't know what narrative purpose it serves, I guess is what I'm driving at here. We know that the Empire are not the good guys. We don't need to prove that every single Imperial we ever come across is just an absolute terrible human being. Largely because that just can't be the case. I mean, realistically, the vast majority of Imperials are probably just regular people that either don't know about some of the things that the Empire is doing, or don't like the alternative, which was the chaos of the Clone Wars. And so, like, I guess the greatest example is the Imperial Senate. Like, that's just the Senate from the Republic. It's just now it's the Empire. And eventually it's the New Republic. Like, it's the same people in various positions, and the vast majority of the Empire is not the Imperial military. So, but we're barreling towards a situation where you have to wonder, people like General Madine, people like Biggs, like, why did they sign up for the Empire? Like, if every interaction that everyone ever has with the Imperials is hostile, like, why does anyone join them who's not like that? And we know that there are people that join them that are not like that because they defected. You know? Like again, let's stick with General Madine. Do you think he was sitting there like, man, screw those Xenos, I'm going to sign up and join the Empire and fight them, and then one day it's like, whoa, this is a bridge too far. I'm going to join the rebels now. No, that's not how it works. So we're barreling toward this problem of, like, I'm not saying that we have to, the Empire as an organization, of course, irredeemable. Like, don't depict, I'm not saying it has to be depicted as if there's a silver lining in there somewhere, anything like that. But by having every single Imperial that we meet be these extremes, where are the people that defect eventually? You know, where are the people that signed up either, again, to avoid the Clone Wars again, or who just signed up just, because the galactic economy is crap or something and they need a job or whatever. Like, where are those people? Because if every single Imperial we meet is, terrible, those people don't exist, and that there's not enough people to run the Empire like that. There would be constant infighting and backstabbing and everything else. And the exact problem the Sith have always run into. So, like, it doesn't make any logical sense. And that's, the problem is, it's okay when you don't think about those things, when the show isn't forcing you to start considering these ideas. And it's the same problem that comic books run into. See, comic books, like, let's use Marvel here. Comic books operate on comic book logic. They do not work on real world logic. There's all kinds of real world things that just do not work in comic books. Okay? It's assumed that the police are just absolutely powerless against supervillains, even though most of them, a hail of bullets will do them in. It's assumed that, yeah, sure, they're vigilantes, but, the cops are never going to actually catch them. And more importantly, the government's never really going to step in. Even though some of these people have pretty spectacular powers. Uncanny powers, if you will. And that's also why certain aspects like the X-Men just don't feel right in Marvel. Because you got the government constantly harassing them. But not like Spider-Man or the Avengers. I mean, there's reasons why. And like, there's comic book reasons why. But that difference, to make the X-Men feel different, forces you to beg questions about the rest of Marvel. And that's why whenever they try to tackle like actual political topics, it tends to not work, because you're trying to shoehorn them into a framework that those things don't exist, that they don't work. That's why Watchmen, for instance, is able to tackle things like, well, eventually Congress is just going to be like, well, these people, this is all illegal, like, just arrest these people. Don't even provide them tacit support, to expand the Hulkbuster program within the military to be the Superhero Buster program and take all these freaks down. Like, you can do that in Watchmen, because it's going to be a singular story. And it's a world that has superheroes but doesn't operate on superhero logic. And so we see the fallout. Most of the heroes just quit because they don't want to be arrested. Only the real crazies hang it out. And, also points out that it'd probably be mostly crazy people trying to be superheroes. So, like with Marvel, you run into situations like well, like the registration and like Civil War. Okay? So after everything that's happened over the decades, there's finally one incident that the government's just like, all right, that's it. And to be clear, I mean, this incident is a school being destroyed. Okay? You know, and there's casualties. But like, this is after Onslaught devastated New York. I mean, like, a realistic accounting of Onslaught would probably have left hundreds of thousands, if not millions, dead. Okay? I think somewhere in there is where we found out the Hulk has miraculously not killed a single person in any of his rampages. Like, that's absurd. See, like, that's the kind of thing that, like, as long as we're operating on comic book logic, okay, you know, because we don't want to think of the Hulk as just out there smashing all kinds of people whenever he's doing this stuff. You know, it's a bunch of property damage. But, you know, comic book physics, comic book logic, okay, so no one gets killed, fine. But the moment we start introducing these real-world aspects and expecting real-world consequences, then we have to start asking real-world questions. You know, like, again, back to the Hulk. It's like all of a sudden, well, so accountability is important, so there are casualties to these things, and we're still supposed to believe the Hulk has never accidentally killed anybody? Like, that doesn't make a damn bit of sense. You know? Or, okay, so we're going to arrest these people. Now, the government knows for a fact that the Skrulls exist. Shape-shifting aliens who have had designs on Earth more than once. And there's not some kind of active protocol to constantly be screening for them, like we eventually saw in one of the Transformers movies where they start just detecting energon signals and attack them mercilessly. Like, where's that? That would happen. You know, if for any kind of remote realism, like, that would definitely be a thing. Or how the government just lets Tony Stark, and the movies kind of started to address this point, but didn't go very far with it. The movies, you know, Tony Stark has all this fantastic technology, and the government says, like, oh, sure, he can be a one-man walking Armageddon, essentially. We don't care. That's fine. No, he would be arrested. His stuff would be confiscated. Other scientists that are loyal to the government would dissect it, reverse engineer it, and the U.S. would have an army of Iron Men. And so, like, those are the consequences of these things once you start introducing real-world logic to it, and the whole thing falls apart. And so, I would really don't want to see that with Star Wars, because there's a lot in Star Wars that, you know, it's gonna fall apart if you start to really look too closely into it. Like, how exactly does the galactic government work? Like the Republic, okay? Like old Bail Organa, doesn't he rule Alderaan? And he's also the senator. I didn't hear a whole lot about democracy in there anywhere. Like, I don't think he's elected to that position. I think it's just his. And that's why Leia becomes the senator later on. You know, it's hereditary. And if it's hereditary, well, that's not democratic. And so when they're sitting there babbling about democracy dying, like, not so sure democracy was actually in play here, because we don't know anything about it. And now it begs the question. Also, was the Republic just really that terrible that once they tried to rebuild it, the First Order just obliterates it? I mean, they're just a fraction of the Empire's power, and they destroyed it. You know, that tells me that, you know, it's not good. Also, it forces us to ask questions like, so Palpatine ruled the galaxy for roughly 20 years, builds up the Empire, massive fleet of ships, you know, tens of thousands of Star Destroyers, God only knows how many TIE fighters, stormtroopers, etc., etc. And a rebellion who's almost entirely at Endor in Return of the Jedi is able to turn the tables from that point and defeat the Empire. Like, the Rebel fleet has like 20 ships left in it, you know, some fighters. And they're sitting there partying on Endor when you know that, like, the moment the Death Star explodes, the likely outcome is nearby fleets are going to start arriving to start dealing with the rebels. Okay, like, that's the logical outcome. And, you know, they're just other things that, like, the dominoes begin to start falling once you start introducing too much realism into a setting that's never been grounded in anything remotely resembling realism. So, and you run into problems like, okay, so the Rebel fleet, are all the ships just stolen? They can't have a shipyard, because a shipyard is a fixed position, and there's no way they could defend a fixed position against the Empire. Like, just straight up, they do not have the resources, because the Empire is going to send an exploratory fleet, and if somehow that gets beaten back, they're going to take count of what all's there, and then the Empire is just going to send 10 times as much as that and just flatten everything. See, that's why the rebellion itself doesn't make any sense as far as how it could possibly win. And that's the problems you're going to start running into once you start getting to the nitty-gritty of how the Empire works. Well, we're going to need to know how the rebellion works too. And there's no satisfactory answers to be had there as far as how they could win. Oh, they could keep up low-level guerrilla warfare for forever. But actually making any real progress? No. No, not in any military sense. They just don't have the resources, and they never will, because the Empire can effectively be almost everywhere, and they have overwhelming numerical superiority. Like, I don't even know if there's a real world. The real world analog to this would be like here in the United States, if rebels rose up in, I don't know, like Kansas City, and took over a few blocks of the city, and like built a plant to manufacture weapons. Like, the government's going to know where the plant is, and they're just going to destroy it. Like, the rebels can't just pick up the plant and move it someplace. And even if they could, the government's going to know where they're moving it to and meet them there, or in transit or something. Like, fixed facilities become a liability to a guerrilla outfit. And so they can't have shipyards. So if they don't have shipyards, then every resource they have is non-expendable. And, any engagements they have with the Empire, they cannot win a war of attrition. That's why towards the end of Rogue One, whenever so many of their ships just get demolished, that probably set them back until Return of the Jedi. And so, because they're going to steal ships here and there, I guess. And, find ships that have been decommissioned. That's how they got a bunch of their fighters, things like that. And you'll have things here and there, but the Empire they're not going to lose. The game is very rigged in their favor. So that's the problem with, hey, let's introduce a whole bunch of realism to a fantasy setting, because then you have to start asking real questions for the realism to work and to make sense. If you go too far. Now the problem is, where is too far? I don't think we're there, at least we're not for me, but I see for some people that we are. And we'll see how it goes going forward with Andor in particular, but like, it's not just Andor, So you got to know where you're setting, where it sits, where it is, what's, what is too far, what's not too far. You've got to know these things. Anyway, that's just something I wanted to kind of ramble about for a little bit there. Hopefully you guys have some comments down in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Are the settings that have taken things too far, that like things just drastically changed somewhere in the setting for the worse, or are there ones where it transitioned and it made it better? Because I'm not saying I don't want adult themed Star Wars. I do, but again, like, you've got to understand where you are, what you're in, and how you're going to affect things. Anyway, it's just my opinion. So let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Sharing and commenting helps grow the channel, and of course, subscribing as always. But that's all I've got for today. So I will be seeing you folks later.